chancellors of each system have been asked to provide opening comments. The general counsels are here as resource witnesses, and the chancellors will have 5 minutes to complete their remarks, and we'll allow the chancellors in each panel to provide their opening remarks, and then we'll open up for questions. So thank you very much, Chancellor Milliken. We would ask you to go first. Welcome. Glad you're here, and appreciate you being here at the Capitol after a very busy and challenging couple of weeks. Not that all of your weeks are not challenging and busy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm, as the chairman said, J.B. Milliken. I'm the Chancellor of the University of Texas System. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today to report on the progress of the UT system and its 14 institutions in fully implementing the requirements of SB 17, codified as Texas Education Code 51.3525. Following the 88th regular legislative session, the UT System Board of Regents promptly committed the UT system to implementation of the new law. In August of last year, the board adopted a new Regents rule regarding implementation, compliance, and reporting required by SB 17. In September, the UT system issued working guidance to our institutions, providing detailed answers to commonly asked questions about the law. This document was drafted by our Office of the General Counsel, and it benefited significantly from regular discussions held among the chief legal officers of all public university systems in Texas. Through this collaborative approach, which continues today, we've been aided in the development of best practices, common interpretations, and uniform compliance across all systems. In November of last year, I presented to the Board of Regents a new UT system policy binding on all of our institutions, which, based on the new law and the Regents rule, imposed a comprehensive set of requirements for our institutions to meet the January 1 effective date of the law. This new system-wide policy, UTS 197, required the elimination of all DEI offices, the cessation of all DEI duties by any employee, volunteer, or contractor, the prohibition of required DEI statements for any purpose, as well as the prohibition of consideration of such statements voluntarily submitted, the banning of any and all preferences on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin, the prohibition of any and all DEI training as a condition of employment, enrollment, or performing any institutional function, and considerable additional detail addressing all elements of the implementation required by SB 17. And while we don't typically take administrative policies to the Board of Regents for approval, in this case we did, and the board unanimously endorsed UTS 197. Throughout the period following Governor Abbott's signing of the new law and the effective date of January 1, 2024, we worked closely with our institutions to identify all areas affected by the law, the Regents' policies, and the steps needed to comply. I met regularly with all presidents to review the requirements, the progress they were making in implementation, and to respond to questions. UT System has over 255,000 students and over 120,000 faculty, staff, and healthcare professionals. It is an enormous operation. And a change of the magnitude of SB 17 required the work of many administrative offices and supporting staff. Given the importance of the new law to the legislature and to the governor and the enormous financial consequences of violation, ensuring compliance has been a top UT System priority over the last year. The UT System Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and the Vice Chancellor and General Counsel created a template for each institution to report to our offices in a common format on office closures, FTE eliminations or reassignments, budget savings, and contract cancellations. To date, based on the institutional responses, we estimate that over $25 million will be saved or reallocated to other university mission-related purposes by closing 21 DEI offices, eliminating 311 full and part-time positions that performed now prohibited DEI duties, and canceling 681 contracts, programs, and trainings of now prohibited DEI activities. In addition to closing offices, eliminating positions, and changing hiring practices, we understood we needed a system for ongoing oversight and compliance. In February, I asked the Chief Audit Executive of the UT system, our internal auditor, to provide all institution audit chiefs with a comprehensive set of guidelines for auditing all aspects of the institution affected by the law and Regents policies. Also, as we reported in our recent letter to the state auditor, I directed each institution to conduct internal audits regarding compliance with SB 17, beginning earlier this spring. We also provided the state auditor with contact information of each of the principal compliance officers at each institution. Chairman Creighton, in my letter to you in advance of this hearing, I described in some detail how the Board of Regents and the UT System Administration has ensured the compliance of our institutions with SB 17, largely as I have testified today. I believe our board, our system administrative leadership, and our presidents and their administrative teams have undertaken the significant work of executing the many changes in a very large operation in good faith and successfully. And we have mechanisms in place to continue audit oversight to ensure compliance on an ongoing basis. I want to close with an assurance to the subcommittee and the leadership of the state that we are deeply committed to providing post-secondary success to all students. I know you share this goal. Our priorities continue to be focused on expanding access, on increasing affordability, and in putting in place the resources that all of our students need, not only to graduate, but to launch strong careers aligned with in-demand jobs and good earning opportunities. At this point, Senator, I'd be pleased to respond to questions, turn it over to my good friend, Chancellor Sharp, or whatever the will of the committee is.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor Milliken. We'll, if we can, members, we'll get through Chancellor Sharp's comments and remarks, and then we'll open up for questions. Chancellor Sharp, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Could I have a little point of privilege in correcting a tweet that was forwarded by KTRH today without bothering to check with us? And that was that the student newspaper asked our Title IX director at Texas A&M and interviewed him. The Title IX director said they're working real hard to implement the new Title IX regulations. Immediately thereafter, I sent a memo to all of the presidents saying, we're not doing that. We anticipate that the governor will say otherwise, and he did the next day. And so the problem is our good friends at Scorecard wouldn't print that part of it. They just printed the first part of it. Having said that, the Texas A&M University System and its member institutions and our regents have worked hard in complying with Senate Bill 17. I instructed the system to move quickly and directed them to implement it by September 1 instead of waiting till January 1st. The regents also have progress reports at every meeting. We take the implementation of Senate Bill 17 very seriously. In the process of implementing Senate Bill 17, we confirmed what we initially believed, and that's the A&M system did not have a large footprint in DEI. When we reviewed our 8 state agencies, we found nothing. Among our 11 universities, we had 9 DE offices. Why not 11? Well, because Texas A&M Kingsville and Texas A&M International shuttered their DEI offices before the governor's office February 6, 2023 letter reminding all state agencies about their responsibilities in hiring. And those 9 DE offices had 27 full-time employees. That's system-wide. I'm asked all the time, so how come y'all didn't fire 61 people like your brothers over in Austin? Well, it was because we only had 8, and so it's pretty difficult to get to 61. Those 8 have been eliminated. Across the Texas A&M system, we only had 114 positions, but most were part-time. They were student workers, maybe had where a professor might have had 5% of his time or 10% of his time dedicated to it, or a student worker answering the phones. You might have been there half-time or something like that. Those are the folks that have had any DEI duties whatsoever. As I said, many of them were 10%. That's in a system with about 28,000 full-time employees. All full-time positions were eliminated by mid-October. The remaining positions were eliminated before Senate Bill 17 took effect on January 1st. 8 of the 27 full-time employees were separated from the system. The others had their duties reassigned. Many were faculty members or staffers whose DEI duties might account for 10% or less of their time again. The rest were student workers who did clerical work, but that was only the start of our efforts to comply with the law. When the governor's office issued its letter in February of 2023, immediately called the system members to review their employment processes and affirm their compliance with the letter's sentiment. Less than a month after the governor's letter, I issued a press release reinforcing that the A&M system would never hire any employee based on any factor other than merit. The Texas A&M system does not use race in admissions or hiring. As soon as Senate Bill 17 was signed into law, we required system members to begin submitting data of all programs, offices, trainings, organizations, websites that supported DEI efforts. The Office of General Counsel, System Audit, and our system and member compliance officers all contributed to providing guidance and review to all system members. Our centralized approach culminated in the creation of our operational manual, which you should have, for complying with the law. It also includes procedures and contacts to report any possible infractions so we can investigate and address any concerns that may come up in the future. In September, our internal audit department began an audit of DEI for all our member institutions. The audit is going to determine if each of our members has designed and established a system of internal controls to ensure ongoing compliance with Senate Bill 17. Internal audit has completed work at 9 members so far, plans to complete the audit work of the others by the end of June. We at the First University system, we asked the state auditor if we could be the first system audited, and we welcome that opportunity. We're eager to go first because we think we've done the job, and we want to find out if that's not the case so we can correct any oversight. We'll help create a model for the state officers to do this with all higher education institutions to ensure compliance down to the most granular level in an ongoing, continuous manner going forward. We'll be open and transparent with the auditors. And we think the facts are on our side, and we're convinced state auditors will agree. If we've missed anything, we want to know so we can finish the job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chancellor. Members, at this time, we'll open up questions for the panel. Our general counsel for each of the flagships and the university systems are here as a resource and available for any of our questions or concerns. I'll lead off. Chancellor Milliken, with the University of Texas working towards compliance, the committee fully understands the enactment clause was in January, right? And we're just several months in towards the summer months. We understand that there is a road that we're on to work in the best way possible to achieve compliance. You mentioned $25 million in programs, 311 positions, 600 plus programs total as part of your opening remarks. Is this a strategy under this audit system and under this report that you provided to the committee to continue the compliance effort to reach critical mass on all that was mentioned in your testimony, or where are we on that from President Hartzell's original announcement of 60 plus positions being removed?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We immediately began to identify throughout the system all of the activities, the offices, et cetera, that were in violation of SB 17, and to make plans for changes there. Some of our campuses, I know I said 21 DEI offices, that does not mean that every campus even had one. I'm aware of some of our campuses that had 0, but some existed at different levels. We think that in response to the request that the General Counsel and the Chief Academic Officer of the system made, that we have identified through the work of our presidents and their staffs, the positions, the programs, the hiring practices, et cetera, that we need to have changed to comply with the law. We will continue to audit that, both at the system level and at the institution level to ensure that we have complied with all aspects of the law. That will be an ongoing process, and those audits are underway.
So walk me through the differences on the variations of faculty that are DEI specific on their job description. Some, it's my understanding and the committee's understanding, are faculty that are in the classroom that are teaching, but they also have an additional duty as, let's say, in the School of Engineering, they are the designated DEI personnel for the School of Engineering or at McCombs or what have you, and so some of those positions were removed to comply with Senate Bill 17, and then that faculty person just went back to the classroom to otherwise accomplish what they were there from the start, to begin their teaching, resume their teaching, duties, or some of those DEI related positions were terminated and that individual no longer had employment with the university at all. Can you tell me about both of those scenarios?
Yeah. So in the case of faculty, where a faculty member may have had a part-time administrative assignment, as they often do for any variety of administrative tasks, those tasks were completely eliminated. So in the case of somebody who was a tenured faculty member at UT Austin, that person then had the opportunity to be 100% faculty and not whatever portion of that responsibility was dedicated to another purpose.
So with your mention of the audit provisions in the report and in the framework, is it the university's intention to report to the committee the total amount of money that will be available to redeploy towards other efforts and strategies? You mentioned a $25 million number, but is that in flux, or is that a total number that's determined?
The numbers I gave are those reported by each of the 14 institutions and summed. We will have audits both at the institutional and system-wide level to confirm that those are accurate and that is the total amount of resources that's available for reallocation. But the testing of that hasn't been completed yet.
Right.
What we're operating under right now is, I think, the good faith submissions from each of our institutions on the numbers.
And then your 311 position number in the spring of 23, it was our information that number was around 379. Is there a chance there was duplicative comparisons where there might be multiple DEI positions at the university or within the system that are accomplished by one individual?
So I'm not certain of that, and I may defer to the general counsel in a minute, but there are activities that some of these people were included within the scope of their office, whether it was veterans programs or physical disability programs or others that were not addressed by SB 17, that would continue either by them or in another office. So I don't know whether the original number included all of the people in those sort of student service related areas. But that's the best of my understanding. But
Yeah, no, I think that captures a lot of it. We've kind of cleaned up the data and we came up with 311 is the best number we can come up with right now. When we were collecting the data, we realized that some people were reporting the same person in two different places. They lost their job over here, but they were reassigned a different, non-DEI job over there. And they ended up putting them in both columns. So we went back and cleaned it up. But it's 311, but that may change over time. We may find there's some that we haven't collected.
if I just could put a exclamation point on that, I think through the audit process, we will learn more. We may, in fact, learn that we haven't addressed everything, but that's why we have an internal audit process to help us understand whether we're complying either with this law or any other. So I look forward to receiving those audit reports from each of our institutions and from our UT system auditor so we can make any corrections we need to.
I appreciate the very nature of the audit being included in the system's goals for compliance because in my opinion, as you mentioned in your testimony, It's hard sometimes for the public and us as members to really grasp how large these institutions and these systems are, how many employees are involved. You mentioned you mentioned the total number of students being right around 250,000. Is that correct? And then
Yes.
125,000 faculty and administrators, or?
You could be right. I said over 120,000,
Okay.
but maybe it's 125.
Yeah.
The vast majority of those are employed in our health-related institutions, which are about 70% of the budget of the UT system. So that includes nurses, hospital support, all of those things. It's not like we have one employee for every 2 students. Most of those are in the healthcare.
I understand that for sure, and I just wanted to clarify, because that total number is a staggering number, and certainly when we're looking at the state budget and what it takes to run these institutions, carrying out compliance is a major task, and I know no one knows that better than you here on this panel. But it's important when we hear about an audit auditing process for the committee to understand how much time would be needed for that audit to be complete, in your opinion.
I don't know that I have the answer, but I'd be happy to get it for you. We provided very detailed guidelines on what needed to be included in every audit. It's several pages, single-spaced, about each area that needs to be audited.
Right.
I don't know when they'll be finished.
Fair enough.
But our goal is, as I think any of my colleagues' goals would be, is if there is a mistake or an oversight that we discovered that, we don't leave it for the state auditor to discover it in their review.
That's right.
The consequences of violation of the law are quite significant, and we want to do everything we can to understand that we're in full compliance.
And I preface that question with, again, a reminder to those listening about your testimony on the size of the system in and of itself, because that the very nature of those numbers alone, it's understandable that if you're in an audit process, sometimes you've completed it when you've completed it. But it's important to the committee that we receive as accurate of reporting as possible as we lead into our summer work and our fall work in the interim committee assignments, and as we sort of work towards January, which is hard to believe that we'll be back in session again at that time. We'll be having our budget hearings and on and on, and please report as you can on the compliance aspects of it. Chancellor Sharp, the same question. For Texas A&M, I'm assuming, and I know your testimony was that compliance wasn't as difficult for Texas A&M because DEI wasn't as predominant or ingrained within the institution, that it just didn't take a long time to comply. And I think you even mentioned that a significant part of the system's compliance was tied together and maybe wrapped in a bow and complete even before the bill was passed. But is there a system in place to continue to audit to make sure there wasn't a renaming, reauthorizing, or relaunching of DEI programs on the A&M campus?
Absolutely. Our auditor has instructions and is doing that right now. He's finished 9 of the universities. He's got 2 more to go. Should be finished by June 1st, a complete audit. Then we'll go through it again. It also has set up a system for ongoing compliance. As you said, the penalties are severe. So we have ongoing compliance that our auditor and his entire office is going to be working on every day.
So I know with both institutions, there are continuing efforts to carry out equity-based outcomes rather than merit-based outcomes. That is just the nature of those that are in charge to hire or those that are teaching in classrooms. There's certain aspects of the scope of Senate Bill 17, and then there's beyond the 4 corners of the document, right? There is a world beyond the scope of the bill itself. And I know the University of Texas in its announcements, you had sort of a holistic approach from what I could gather, that that yes, you were working to comply with the legislation, but also the system took the opportunity to find any other duplicative efforts and inefficiencies and make changes in those categories. Can you explain to the committee, how you arrived at a certain destination on the decisions that were made?
So became very clear to us early on, and our board made a pretty strong statement about this last fall, that this is the law of the land, that we will fully commit to implement every element of it. In fact, they said you may not like the law, you may think that but it is the law, and we are committed. We're not going to look for loopholes. We're not going to look for workarounds. We are going to fully implement this. And with regard to the audits, it's my hope, and at least the initial phase of these will be done this summer, because we have to certify in August that we are in compliance with the law. And I want to have that on my desk when we make that certification.
That makes sense. Chancellor Sharp, along the same lines, were there certain decisions involved with compliance related to the bill itself that exceeded the legislation, or just you found all in all in a review of university policies and hiring and potential political loyalty oaths that were required of applicants to be a professor that might have been required, or diversity type statements? We've got a change in the landscape on affirmative action and on DEI as it's being banned here and in other states. What is the thought process of university leadership as you visit with the regents and just understand the culture going forward?
I mean, we're going to comply with the law 110%. There's no doubt about that. But both you and Senator West alluded to something that I think is important in this, and I think.
Could you speak closer to the microphones,
I
Chancellor?
think DEI made us a little bit lazy, made bureaucrats a little bit lazy, okay? Because all of a sudden you put up a website, you say this, that, and the other. Joe Blow walks in, okay, we're going to hire him. What we've done, and I've done this in the past, is we devoted that money that we saved and some more, for instance, at Texas A&M, to recruiting, to doing exactly what Royce West is talking about. Act like a football coach. Go in there and find the best that's now going to Stanford, that's now going to somewhere else, the best minority kids or whatever. Make sure that they know what the opportunities are. The result so far has been a double-digit increase in those kids that are applying to Texas A&M, just because, I mean, the problem is a lot of kids out there don't know, and a lot of high schools don't know what's available at places like UT and A&M and places like that. And so we're frankly spending a lot of time and a lot of effort beefing up those offices around the state to go into all high schools, not just the ones that, historically maybe have been the big ones that have been targeted and stuff like that. And I think you're going to see, if we all do this, I think you're going to see that there's a hell of a lot of qualified kids that need to be in college that don't know they need to be in certain colleges.
How do we change the culture that was established during the DEI years and get back to more merit-based outcomes as a mindset rather than equity-based mindsets?
We've always been merit-based in both admissions and in hiring, but I think that this legislation makes it absolutely crystal clear. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that if you tread back into the bad waters again, something bad's going to happen to you. But I think one of the good things that has happened as a result of this, and I don't think we're the only university doing it, is you got a bunch of people getting off their butts and going out and recruiting and finding the very best kids that exist out there that don't even know they should be at A&M, don't even know they should be at UT and places like that are top 10% somewhere else, and they've been recruited by Harvard since they were in the 8th grade and never heard from any of us, in state institutions. Now they're hearing from us. They know that there's great institutions within the state of Texas, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take them away from those schools.
The committee shows that A&M had in 2021 about $20+ million dedicated towards DEI-related programs. Is that your understanding? Is that accurate from the numbers that you have reflected for the budget for the system? And how can that money be redeployed towards finding those exact students that you just mentioned that are some of the best and brightest, don't come from a background related to anything financial related opportunities, just lower socioeconomic in general? How do we reach those students by redeploying funds like that towards them and opening up the doors
I'm not
to
sure
Texas
about the
A&M?
$20 million figure, but that is exactly what's happening. At A&M, for instance, they are putting offices in places they never had offices before, not just in Dallas and Houston and some of the major cities and things like that, but in places around Dallas and places around Houston and all over the state, and using that money to deploy to recruit. So instead of just having one small office in the Rio Grande Valley, there'll be several people there. There'll be several people in San Antonio, and they're already there. And we know it works because what we're seeing is those applications jump up by double digits already. And that's what you have to do. You have to make sure they understand that this is not some huge institution that you're going to get lost in, that you need to come see it. And generally, if we get them to campus, we'll get them. But we have to recruit them, and that's what wasn't happening, I think, across the state.
So we're only talking about 10 years of DEI programs, right? There was an entire world of higher education opportunities for student supports and recruitment of the best and brightest across the state, regardless of background or individual distinctive differences, right? I mean, just trying to find the best and the brightest, and especially those that have not had the opportunity through their family to go to college before. It might be that first generation student that Senator Menendez mentioned. What does the post-DEI world look like? Do we go back to where we were prior to DEI and start there, or do we build a new framework that accomplishes many different goals holistically that everyone can be proud of? And how long will it take to do that? How long will it be? Does it need to be the legislature that provides that blueprint and that framework, or should we defer to the expertise and the best and brightest in the higher education world to bring that framework to us?
I think that's already happening. A good example is the Brown Foundation in Houston that, they recruit for very specific purposes and kids. It's a very diverse group of young men and women that come in, and A&M has to do that on steroids. They have to go out and just find the best, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they come from or whatever. And one of the things that really I think is helpful is we started something called the Engineering Academies with 10 community colleges around the state. And you have lots of kids that are poor. They may be white, brown, black, whatever, but they cannot leave home right now. They can't afford the tuition. They can't leave mom. They maybe have part-time jobs or something like that. And so we partner with, say, San Antonio Alamo College. Alamo College teaches the reading and writing part of it, and we send an engineering professor from College Station down there to teach them the engineering part. And then after 2 years, after they've saved tens of thousands of dollars, they come in as juniors in the engineering program. And guess what? And most of them are minority. And guess what? They have the highest GPAs upon graduation than all of the engineering students, including the ones that came there as freshmen. And so they're there. You just have to figure out a way to find them.
Chancellor Milliken.
If I could add to that, Mr. Chairman, and I hate to take issue at all, but with you especially. But the term the best and the brightest sometimes bothers me a bit, because Texas is going to need a heck of a lot more. I'm not sure I'd get in if it were just the best and the brightest. So,
Sure, of course.
So
Well, it depends on how we define best. So don't discount when I say best, that I mean best from a holistic standpoint and not just academic, right?
we're going to need a lot more.
Otherwise, I would have
college-educated
said brightest and brightest.
and educated beyond high school in Texas to be competitive, to give people the opportunity that we need to.
Right.
And so our board has made it clear, and I think we'll have a good story to report on the funds that we reallocate. Our board's made it clear that every dollar we spend ought to be treated like it's our own, and it ought to go to support our students, their access, the affordability, and the success. And a couple of years ago, we put about $470 million into that to provide the Promise Plus program for students across Texas. And an example of how we're providing access in the Rio Grande Valley, where now every student who comes from a family with an adjusted gross income of $125,000 or less pays zero tuition and fees. That's over 90% of their undergraduates, and over 90% of their undergraduates are Hispanic. And they are all going to RGV with no tuition and no mandatory fees.
And is that sustainable, or?
Yes, it is. It's an endowment.
Yeah.
That endowment, in fact, we work every day on how we're going to increase that number, whether it's an endowment, whether it's spendable funds, so that we can get to that level across the entire UT system, so that economic access is not a barrier to students, regardless of zip code, regardless of background.
Senator West mentioned a very important point earlier about just accountability, right, from top to bottom. And there's different measures and variables, different expectations among the members on what we expect from our taxpayer-funded public universities, right? I mean, as I mentioned, we've got some of the finest universities in the world, not just at this table, but that will testify here through the day. And, from an accountability standpoint, leadership begins at the very top. Do you feel that our boards of regents, that you as chancellors, that our university presidents, that our deans, those in charge of hiring, that they're all bought in? And if how could they be? All right, if we're under a decade of DEI as a mindset, how do you provide that sort of leadership from the top that allows the team to understand why we arrived at a certain destination before hearts and minds in their respective positions, that they're bought in a way that is not just sort of begrudging compliance, or if you don't notice, we otherwise will do what we want. How do you accomplish that goal in the culture of such a gigantic system?
We may not capture everybody's heart or mind, but the law is pretty clear, and the consequences are pretty significant. I think everybody in the leadership throughout the university system understands that. I also think that they understand that we haven't done a good enough job. So long before the bill was debated in the Senate and passed, our numbers have not been what they should be. And so our focus is 100% on how to expand that access, and we're doing that through early college, high schools, and through other pipeline programs throughout the state. That's where we're going to make the most difference.
There's a misconception out among the media and those throughout the state and in higher academic world, for sure, that we're not working on all of those goals collectively unified. There may be a difference of opinion on if we're taking the best path or accomplishing with the best practices moving forward. But what you're mentioning on that point right there is very important, that we have many other bills, many other budgeting priorities, and as Senator West often says, we can be better, right? But I think we have to get to the point to where we understand that what was not working, some would say it could have been repaired, some would say it could have been modified. Others that felt like passage of Senate Bill 17 was very important, felt like we needed to move on in a different direction. Certainly concerns about equity over merit being the political oaths, the mandatory pronoun training, the differences that were sort of infiltrating or polluting the sort of the mainstream experience on campus. Curriculum is another issue in and of itself. Political ideology being advanced, right? Chancellor Sharp, when we're talking about leadership from the top, and I'll defer to other members after this, President, and we'll have these conversations with the different systems, but I'm very focused on who's leading, right? And because who's leading those teams under them is just very important, because their mindset sets the direction and the pace. They may not always be mindful of a provision in a bill that has a clawback on funding, right? They just kind of in their world, they've got their focus. It may not be the type of focus that is the chancellor's focus or the president's focus. With President Welsh being sort of a recent new hire as a president, and you know where I may be headed with this, but he's published in saying that he felt like he did not support Senate Bill 17. He felt like it was the wrong direction. And coming from a DEI-related position, now in the position that he's in, that's so fresh and new as a new hire to be president of the flagship university's main campus, how are we with President Welsh based on his comments that are widely published?
I guess I missed those comments, but he's doing, all of our presidents, we meet with him on a very regular basis, talk about all of this, and every single one of them are following the directions that I give them and that the board gives them. I don't have any concerns with any of them. About half of our presidents are new, so they weren't indoctrinated, in this to begin with, and so I don't have any concerns about him. I have no doubt that he's going to follow the law. We work very closely with him. The state auditor will be notifying me immediately if there is anything contrary to what we're talking about here today within any of our universities, or for that matter, state agencies.
No concerns.
No concern.
Chancellor Milliken, same question on just
About-
university leadership, not about
President Welsh.
President Welsh, no. So, same question related to the UT system and leadership. Obviously, so many deans, so many of those in charge of hiring and recruitment, and it's a gigantic system, from a leadership position that like the one that you have. How do you monitor compliance with DEI on the things that just are not included in the audit?
I probably can't change what's in everyone's head, every aspect of that. But I do know.
If you figure that out, let me know.
I do know that at the highest levels, and I include all the presidents in this and their teams, we spent a lot of time on this. Everybody understands this is the law. We're going to completely comply. The consequences are untenable if we don't. But that doesn't mean we're giving up on the access, the support that some of these offices existed for. It's now clearly for every student, for all students that need that support. That's what our focus is. That's what we're about anyway. That's what our board wants us to be about. How do we provide the broadest possible access to a changing demography in Texas and ensure that those students succeed and get out and launch great careers and achieve their potential and contribute to the economic success of the state?
So I mentioned in my remarks UTMB and the Corps. There are many alums that are chiming in, with very good information of just that we're not at a place where we're in compliance. And again, the enactment clause, was in January when that kicked in. There's work to do, left to accomplish. But you were going to mention something else, Chancellor Sharp.
I was going to ask Ray to just talk about the process that we have to ensure that a year from now or 5 years from now, if there's any aberrations, any detour from what Senate Bill 17 is about, we have a process in place to make sure that's caught.
Good.
Okay.
Ray, please. Thank you.
Sir. I just wanted to kind of emphasize for the board, for the committee rather, that one of the things that we've done is to try and create a process that will support the board's certification to the legislature, which is required this summer. And so we want to make sure we had a clearly documented process. We had all the evidence needed for the presidents and the chancellor and the board to confirm to you that we are in compliance. And in terms of the question about what are we doing to address compliance by deans and others at lower levels, our process does require the deans to certify up to the provost and the VPs to certify up to the president. So we have a paper trail and we can kind of confirm that at the lower levels of our organization, this is front of mind and that they are kind of fully aware and they've taken the steps to ensure compliance in their respective areas of responsibility. And we want to make sure that we've got that process established and in place because we're going to have to certify on an annual basis going forward. And so we want to make sure we've got a structure that can support this. And in terms of the comment about kind of other ongoing issues, we have set up a centralized system for tracking any alleged violations, any complaints. Those are required to be reported to the system. If parents, students, the media identify an issue of potential non-compliance with SB 17, we log those, we track those, we review them, we determine if there's a violation where remedial action is needed, or if it's just a function of the person not understanding, how SB 17 works. That system is working effectively, and we'll keep that system in place going forward.
But in answer to your question, willful violations of this standard, this law, will result in somebody that probably needs to work someplace else.
So the university system's committed to dealing with those that purposefully choose to subvert Senate Bill 17
Will absolutely not be tolerated.
with termination.
Yes.
Chancellor Milliken, we also have
Yeah, there's
any
Give
comments?
him the chance to say something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're still paying me, I know. No, we're very similar to what Ray suggested that they're doing. And that's one of the things that's been very helpful throughout this process is we have regular meetings among all the general counsels of the systems. And so we've talked about these sorts of things, and we're trying, all of us trying very much our best to fully implement this and to be in compliance. And there are complaint processes. If there's a complaint, we will look into it. And if people are violating intentionally the policy that we have in place, then it could very well lead to somebody's termination.
And we understand, again, it's a road, right? It's a road to compliance. So for instance, UTSA published a report titled Building a Strong DEI Foundation. The report found there were 314 DEI programs at UTSA. The Office of VP Inclusive Excellence was closed. This office represented 21% of those 314 DEI programs. Steps taken to ensure that the rest of those programs, the other nearly 80%, that's accomplished. Is that something that just the committee doesn't know about yet? Or if we could work with your office and your teams to make sure that the lag in information that we have, and there's often a lag, right, that we can fill those gaps so that as we move on closer to January, that we understand that specific programs we show that are in 21% of compliance, that it's at 100. When and if it isn't, I know that's the purpose of the audit that you mentioned, Chancellor. Yeah. Senator West has been very patient with all of my questions, as he always is. He puts up with me in general sometimes. But Senator West, thank you. And
You've covered a lot of territory. I appreciate it.
yes, sir.
Let me start off with this question right here. How will we know whether the dismantling of DEI programs have negatively impacted the purpose of the program from the very beginning in Texas?
By negatively impacting the program.
Purpose of the program. I assume that when you put the DEI, any programs that you have, this has been my experience with higher education, you have a strategic plan, right, for the entire system, component institutions. And all of the different programs are supposed to be put in place in order to further that strategic plan. And so I assume that when DEI was put in at the various institutions around it, it was put in for a particular purpose. What was that purpose?
The purpose was, it depends on whether you're talking about the hiring, the student support programs.
All of the
any
above,
those kinds
all of the
things.
above.
Well, it was designed to support particular populations, and what we have to do now is refocus.
No, that's not what I asked you. What I asked you is, what was the purpose of the program? You said to support various populations in order to do what?
Okay, let me take increased graduation rates.
Did they increase graduation rates? Did the programs increase graduation rates?
With support programs, we have had several of them throughout the university system to support programs for individual student populations to increase the graduation rates in those populations.
So my question was, did they increase graduation rates amongst those particular groups?
I think you would be the first to tell me that the programs we had in place had not been adequately doing what we hoped they would do in terms of increasing enrollments and increasing graduation rates. So it's our job to do that.
Well, okay, I understand that. I'm saying, well, let me go back to my question, and we're going to stick on the question until I get my answer. I don't need to have the answer that I want, but did we see some increase in graduation rates as a result of DEI programs on your campuses?
I'm not sure that they were as the result of those programs. I can't answer that.
So you don't know whether or not the programs, the DEI programs that we were funding with state dollars were being successful?
I think when I referred earlier to that you would agree with me, I think the efficacy of some of these programs was not what we would want it to be.
Okay,
The
so,
success rates.
no, we would agree on that. So do you throw the baby out with the bathwater, or do you kind of figure out exactly what the problems were and then fix the problems, as we do in other areas of higher education and the state government? We don't throw everything out. We figure out what the problem is and fix the problem. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go back to the question. Was there, and it applies to A&M also, institutions across the board, there was a purpose for the DEI programs that you, as the leaders of higher education in the state of Texas, through your presidents, put in place. And I'm asking the question one more time. Did the programs carry out the intent of their purposes? And your response to the question is?
And my response to the question was, I'm not sure that I can tell you whether increasing graduation rates in a particular population was the result of a particular program that may have been designed to support that activity.
Okay, now, and then the question is, and I asked you for this information, I asked you for the specific programs that were dismantled as a result of Senate Bill 17. And I did not get the specific programs that I requested, correct?
You did not,
Okay, so therefore, in answering
but you will.
So therefore, in answering my question, you can't tell me what programs, if any, were successful as part of your strategic plan in order to increase graduation rates amongst the subpopulations, correct?
I don't have that information for this hearing on compliance, but I could certainly provide additional information for you on that.
And I would appreciate that. And I would also appreciate an analysis as to whether or not those programs that have been dismantled impacted the graduation rates of the students. That's a fair question, is it not?
I think it is. I think the legislation actually requires us to do some reporting afterwards on the impact of the bill. So we will be doing that for the legislature, and we'll be doing it for ourselves. Our goal is to increase these numbers now. And
I understand that. Okay. But going back to my question, and I'm going to ask, John, I ask you the same question. And were the programs that were in place at A&M, did they carry out their goals and objectives?
I'm not sure you can isolate it to DEI because there's so many different factors that, scholarships that are private and things like that.
Can you speak
I
up?
do think that,
John, can you speak up?
I'm not sure you can isolate it to DEI because there's so many other factors. What we do know is that spending resources going into the high schools, going into the homes, talking to kids about coming to college and things like that, has made a bigger impact, apparently, from just what we've seen in double-digit increases in applicants for A&M than we had prior to that.
And when you say double-digit applicants, that's from those groups that were using DEI programs, or what?
Well, I don't know who was using DEI programs, but I'm talking about
So you're saying
minority
double-digit
kids.
increase in applicants across the board?
Right,
Okay,
and that's
So-
at A&M.
at A&M. But you can't tell as it relates to these particular programs and the populations that were using these programs. And it's just not ethnic minorities. There were veterans, there were disabled persons, LGBTQ persons. You can't tell whether or not there's been an increase in those subpopulations, correct?
Yeah, and it's hard to look at DEI because, you've been under 10 years or more, and you don't know what it was like 10
Well, I'm
years
trying to figure out
before, but the numbers are dismal.
Well, people keep talking about 10 years. I'm trying to figure out where we're getting 10 years from.
What we will tell you
Have DEI programs been around 10 years on your campuses? I don't think they have.
or somebody had mentioned it.
Somebody said 10 years. I don't know where they got it from. The fact
Okay.
is, DEI programs, as I recall, came about right after George Floyd's death.
Right.
Okay? And then, because we had DEI, and then we had CRT issues also. All of those things came about DEI programs came along, but the resistance against DEI came about after George Floyd's death. That's what I recall. Now, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And so when we say 10 years, I don't know where we get that number from.
Okay.
We had, we showed through the committee, we had DEI programs prior to George Floyd's death, but you're correct, they ramped up in significant numbers and size and scope and scale following his being deceased.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I'd love to look at that. Go ahead.
I think, as I said before, I think maybe folks got lazy. And not just in higher education, but in a whole bunch of these programs. We'll put up a website, say, oh, okay, we're being, we're accepting all folks and stuff like that, but there was no effort, in my opinion, to go out and find the best qualified young men and women. I believe that you can base it on merit, and you can also bring kids from every high school in the state of Texas, and that's what we're trying to do. And the initial results that we saw are showing a marked increase in the number of kids coming in, and we're not done yet in terms of expanding that outreach.
Could you provide that information to the committee?
We can,
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
you bet.
In terms of, I guess this would go to your councils. The chairman went through meticulously exactly what your process was, part of making certain that the institutions were accountable and compliant. If indeed, let me back up. My office has received some complaints that some of the programs that were dismantled complied in part with the law. Is there a review process in place through your systems and the institutions to have, if someone feels as though the programs should not have been terminated, are they able to have a review of that?
I'll go first.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, we spent months putting together our guidelines, which
And
is
I'm sorry, but I wanted to ask, Dan, you and Ray both, if you could state your name for the record.
Oh, okay.
Who you represent, and then resume your testimony.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm Dan Sharphorn. I'm the Vice Chancellor and General Counsel of the University of Texas System. When we put out our guidelines in September, we worked very hard to provide what we thought would be consistent with the law, as best we could read the law and what appeared to be the intent. Within that, we have, as you know, we have 14 institutions. They all have their own attorneys. And so the bottom line for us is to make sure that what they're doing is legal. So, but within that framework, there is some variation depending on the campus, how it's managed or how it's organized. There are some, we've seen some differences. But no, sir, we have not decided that we're going to, as long as what they're doing is in our judgment legal, we have not been tasked to go in and say, well, wait a minute, you're, well, over complying.
So, again, there's no structure, there's no mechanism within the structure to have a program that has been repealed or terminated, reviewed if someone feels as though on the campus it should be.
There's no specific process in place. I could imagine in a given case that if somebody came forward and said you shouldn't have gotten rid of that program, that maybe under the president would have to make the decision. I think to decide to go ahead and take a look at that.
So the president,
Yeah, I think it'd be the president's decision.
as it relates to the bill permits you to keep some DEI programs in order to maintain funding or compliance with accreditation bodies. Did you keep any programs for any of these reasons?
For accreditation,
Right. There was during the legislative session, we had a big discussion about grants, applying for grants, national grants, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question is whether or not there was any discussion about that. And I know that there's an exception in the bill concerning that. So the question is, were any of those programs kept?
we've struggled mightily with how to handle the grants. Part of it is talking to the granting agency to let them know what laws we're dealing with, to make sure that we're not being barred from certain research. But right now, I don't know that we've learned enough to know what the impact is going to be on grants. But we have not, to my knowledge, I don't know that we have kept a DEI program in place because of grantsmanship. But we've got within the statute. They tell us what we can do about under small populations, underserved populations, or first generation students, things of that nature. But we've not, to my knowledge, I don't know that we have. I don't know if you have, Ray.
Right.
I think with regard to the accreditation requirements, we've reviewed those carefully. I think our view is that the language of the accreditors, SACS, for example, is sufficiently broad and flexible that when we confirm that we have very strong anti-discrimination policies, we have very strong proactive recruiting and admissions policies, we reach out to people of all backgrounds, from all neighborhoods, all corners of the state. We don't discriminate, and we do prohibit preferences per Senate Bill 17, but we are very open and inviting and non-discriminatory. We're able to satisfy the accreditors' requirements in that
So
manner.
far.
So far, yes, sir.
Let me move on to another area. The bill exempts student programs. Did any of your changes before the letter from Senator Creighton impact any student programs? And if so, can you tell me which ones and why? I'll start with A&M.
Well, we have had a lot of questions about programs hosted by the various student organizations. And so
Right.
our guidance has been that we support student organizations on our campuses on a viewpoint neutral basis. And if the students, opt to engage and host events that are focused on one particular group or another, that's their prerogative. We support them in a kind of neutral, agnostic manner,
Well,
same as we do the chess
let's-
club, same as we do any
Let's
other
stop
group.
right there. And when I went to college, years ago, student activities fees supported bringing Earth, Wind, and Fire to campus.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Bringing Angela Davis to campus, things of that nature, that had a specific viewpoint. Does this particular DEI, Senate Bill 17, prevent the administration from supporting
The
organizations in their efforts, financially supporting the organization's activities?
Our legal advice to the members has been no, because the bill specifically provides that it does not limit the activities of student organizations.
So has any of your institutions, A&M institutions, as a result of Senate Bill 17, taken the posture that student organizations cannot be financially supported by the universities?
No, sir.
What about Texas?
What, there was in Austin, and maybe you know this, there are some organizations that were distinct in terms of being sponsored, so that they
I'm sorry,
were,
Dan, say that again?
they were a sponsored organization as opposed to being recognized organizations or registered organizations. It costs, in fact, across our different campuses, they have a different way that they have characterized their organization. So for Austin, they had sponsored organizations that were more or less, they were some more funded more than the others, other sorts of student organizations. They have their own sort of permanent space. There was a sufficient nexus between the university and that organization or those organizations that they felt that it would make it look like it was university activity, not just student organization. So they've recharacterized a number of those organizations to registered, not sponsored anymore. And so they've changed that in that sense. And once they're registered, they have much more freedom on what they can do.
Does the university support registered organizations?
Support which?
You said registered.
Registered, yes,
right.
registered. They
Does
provide,
the university provide financial support for registered organizations?
that's my understanding.
Well, sounds like it's my understanding that you don't. You don't know the answer to the question.
I guess I'm not positive. My understanding is that they still provide support for registered organizations.
Do you know whether or not they supplied financial support prior to Senate Bill 17?
Yes.
And so, if there's a change in that, is that consistent with what the Senate Bill 17 requires, or is that a discretionary decision for the president of the university?
I guess I'm not positive. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know for sure exactly how they do it. Austin I think you're talking about UT Austin, and I guess I'm not positive about what the change was then.
Okay, so then my question to you, is it required, or is that a discretionary decision by the president of the university? Is it required by Senate Bill 17, or is that a discretionary
I think
decision?
our posture on the guidelines is that you could support registered student organizations in various ways.
So it's a discretionary decision by the president.
Yes.
Mr. Chancellor, did you want to respond to that?
Our requirement is that they comply with the law.
What?
Decisions that they make beyond that may be discretionary. What isn't discretionary
I'm
is
asking-
absolute compliance with the law.
I'm asking as it relates to these organizations, because that's where I'm getting
There's a
lot.
difference in organizations, for instance, at an institution like UT Austin, where some of them are supported with funds, fee support, university support. There are others who are registered, who have access to space. They can reserve a space for a speaker or for a meeting, that kind of thing. So there's a distinction between the level of support from the institution in these two kinds of groups. And on the first one that Dan was referring to, that is where the institution decided that there's too strong a nexus. with
That's the
the
space piece. I'm
institution.
talking about registered organizations. I understand what Dan was talking about. He was talking about registered organizations.
And registered organizations have access to space, but they're not the same as a sponsored organization.
I understand
They
that,
can
but
continue to
the question
access-
is my, excuse me for interrupting your response. The question is, it's my understanding that registered organizations were able to get financial support from the university prior to Senate Bill 17. And there's some complaints now that they're not able to do that at the University of Texas, I think. Is that the case? Or do you know?
So the short answer is no. The longer answer is no, I don't know, because I've been monitoring the implementation of this at 14 different places, all that have different names and designations of student groups or other things. So I can't say that I'm intimately familiar with that at each institution. But I do believe there is a difference in our institutions in terms of organizations that receive direct support from the institution and the nexus that they have, and those that simply have the ability as students groups to register space, to have a club, to have.
No, I understand that, and let me move on, because I'm pretty certain others have questions too. As it relates to the impact of Senate Bill 17, how will you measure it? as the chancellor of the University of Texas system?
The legislation itself requires a biennial study to study the impact of the implementation of the bill with regard to application rates, acceptance rates, matriculation rates, retention rates, grade point averages, and graduation rates of students disaggregated by race, sex, and ethnicity. We will report that information to the coordinating board, which will then report it to the legislature.
As relates to spring of 2024, okay, are there any students that have been adversely impacted by Senate Bill 17? In terms of scholarships, specifically scholarships?
There is a legal analysis going on at each of our institutions, which Dan may be able to comment on more accurately, whether it is a university controlled resource and what the university can do with those funds if it is designated for a particular group in violation of SB 17. Many of our scholarships come from outside organizations which do not have the same restriction, and they can continue. It's a distinction between the nexus with the university of the entity or fund providing the scholarships.
A&M?
You know, I think as I would agree, the university-funded scholarships, those are awarded without regard to race, gender, national origin, et cetera. Private foundations, private funders can limit their scholarship opportunities in that manner, but all university-funded scholarships are open.
So private scholarships, depending upon what the purpose of the scholarship is and the requirements of the scholarship, you still administered based on the purpose of the scholarship.
Yeah, private funders still provide scholarships that may be restricted in that manner, and we accept those checks and process them, and their students are able to use those scholarships to attend our universities. Yes, sir.
A couple other questions. As it relates to the termination of employees, I noticed, Chancellor Sharp, you indicated that there were several persons that were terminated, and I assume they were not given positions at the component institutions of A&M. They were terminated. Do we have a breakdown on those persons, whether their ethnicity, demographic breakdown on those persons?
We can provide that to you. The number was small, but we can give you a list. I think it was 8 persons system-wide.
System-wide. What about in Texas? Because I asked for that
The
information.
number's larger than that, and yes, we can provide the information to you.
Oh, so that information is available, correct?
I believe it is.
Okay.
I definitely know the identity of each person affected.
I'm sorry.
I know the identity, I don't personally know, but we know the identity of each person affected, each individual.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator West. Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate y'all coming here today. I noticed the Longhorn Chancellor and the Aggie Chancellor have U of H and Tech red ties, so y'all chose to sit right next to each other before y'all testified, so
You said that what?
we're getting along. You
You
know,
said that U of H red tie?
U of H red and Tech, so I see the U of H Chancellor back there, so I appreciate y'all coming today, and I think y'all touched on what we're really getting at here, especially Chancellor Sharp, where we all support diversity and we want to include more students in the kinds of opportunities that our higher education can provide. And part of that is that recruitment aspect, right? So it sounds like that this has, and correct me if I'm wrong, has helped refocus on our mission of providing that equality of opportunity, right? Because equity is not that. Equity is equality of outcome, which, how can you have that when you have a A through F grading system and a or numerical grading system, right? It's not going to be equal outcomes. I mean, that's not how that works. We're about excellence through achievement. So do you think that SB 17 has helped refocus us on that equality of opportunity, which will allow us to focus more on that recruitment of our future students at our flagship universities?
I don't think there's any question about it. I think it's hard work. I mean, recruiting, going all over the state, going to high schools, going to homes. I mean, ask any football coach. It's hard work to do. It's a lot easier. Put up a website, hope they walk in. In places like ours, you got no problem with the walking in. I mean, you don't have to go out and recruit students. They're coming anyway. And in order to do what you're talking about, you've got to get off your butt, and you've got to go out there into all high schools and get the best qualified kids to apply. Competition's good. And so I think, my personal opinion is I think you're going to wind up with a very good result.
We're doubling down on the kinds of programs that are available to all Texans. I mentioned the Promise Plus, and that we're trying to figure out how to expand that. And that is without regard to the identity of any group. It's everyone. Whether or not we will be more successful, I think is one of the things we'll learn from the report that you'll receive on admission rates and graduation rates and that kind of thing. So, these programs were started with I believe, a genuine view to improve graduation rates. Yes, they were focused on particular populations in a number of cases, and we can't do that anymore. And so we're not. We're focusing on all students, and we'll have the results, I think, of how well it works. I hope that we blow the lid off this and do a much better job for all populations in Texas with the kinds of programs that provide access and funding to go to school and support when you're there to graduate.
And we touched on SACS. That's our kind of monopoly accreditor in Texas. And what I'm hearing is that really hasn't been an impediment so far, but are you seeing that it could be, right? I mean, that, when you're going to offer a new degree program, I know we've had issues before. A lot of the time it's the speed at which we get approved. That matters a lot. The timing does. This is something that was talked about when we brought up SB 17. We actually had a bill that we passed in the Senate, which would allow you to choose your accreditor. It didn't have to be SACS. Wish the House had done that. Unfortunately, they did not. But have you seen any, signs of trouble from SACS as potential issues where I doubt it would be just a no, but it would be, we're going to slow this down type thing. That's probably what would happen.
SACS has been traditionally kind of less aggressive on some of these issues than other accrediting bodies. And if you look at the footprint of what SACS covers, the states in the country that it covers, and the kinds of places that, just take Florida and Texas, for instance, and North Carolina and others. It will be SACS's responsibility to provide the accreditation oversight that reflects what these states have done. And so over time, I do not expect that we will receive significant pushback from them. I don't think it's in their interest, and it's not in the interest of the goals of the states and the universities to educate more people.
Very good. And
I agree. I think in a couple of years, a lot of the critics are going to say, this worked. And I think the reason it's going to work is because you're making everybody put effort into it instead of just, as I said, putting up a website and hoping they come in. I think it's going to work.
thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Sharpen. We've actually worked a little bit with your office on the, we had a issue it was brought to our attention by a constituent in the 1973 Center at Sea Aggies in Galveston, Texas A&M there. And think that's been repurposed. And I believe two of the three employees that ran that center resigned. But maybe if you could just speak on, the point of SB 17 was not just to rename and change titles and make no changes whatsoever in how we operate, but how that is actually put into practice. And that's kind of a granular example, and you may not know, and you may have to get back with me on that. But
Yeah, that was a website that was 2019 or something like that. I think Colonel Fossum now knows clean his websites up. And so that doesn't exist anymore.
If I may, Chancellor. In terms of kind of modifying many DEI programs or offices that existed prior to the new law, we have worked very closely with the member institutions, with their VPs, compliance officers, and to ensure that it wasn't just a name change, that it was in fact appropriate changes to the mission, the activities, and that the new purpose of the office, whatever it may be, does in fact comply with the law. In our system, we have a centralized HR management software, Workday, where we're able to pull up, job descriptions, job duties to make sure that those changes were properly implemented. We're able to confirm with compliance officers. So we have spent a lot of time over the last 9 months or so to make sure that the appropriate changes were in fact implemented.
And so I think y'all both touched on that there's kind of a centralized system that y'all have created to monitor compliance, but also be able to allow, I guess is it third parties or only within the systems to report potential violations or questions that people have. Hey, is this compliant? I don't know, and they report it. Is there a centralized way that y'all could share with us? Because like the state auditor's office, a lot of people don't know this. I wish more people did. Has a waste, fraud, and abuse portal that you can report waste, fraud, and abuse with any state agency in the state of Texas. I wish more people knew about that. Of course, it wouldn't just apply to DEI. It would apply to anything, that where someone felt like that the law wasn't being followed, obviously. So it wouldn't be just limited to this, but I think that would be helpful. We've tried to do that on the state level, but it's very anecdotal sometimes in how we're discovering some of these issues, like an old website link. It's a good example. We find that situation pretty often, where someone will send us something, then we get a hold of y'all, whether it's UT or A&M or some other college, and they say, well, we'll pull the link down. It's not active anymore. So some way to kind of better centralize those, I guess, reports would be good, I think.
In our system, we have created a centralized tracking process so that we, at the system office, so the chancellor and the board can be comfortable that we have addressed any real issues of noncompliance. And I'm happy to follow up with the committee. We can provide a report to show you what was reported, what action we took to address the complaints.
Because we want to make it easy on individuals. These are public universities that, taxpayers, the great state of Texas, are helping pay for them. So if they see something that none of us do, then they should have an ability to report that. So just want to make it easier on them. That's all. Thank you.
Members, other questions? Chancellors, you both mentioned a strong commitment to an auditing process that will continue forward and to continue to do everything possible for the system to comply with SB 17. That's correct. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
The committee has concerns about the HRIs, and so if you could just continue with that auditing process to help us understand how the health-related institutions, and specifically medical school curriculum, how that continues to fall within the auditing process, that would be very much appreciated. It is, I know both universities have what's called an Office of Health Equity, and if you could look into that for us as well, those stated goals. And certainly, we all want the best and the brightest to be an eventual, cardiovascular or heart surgeon that ascended based on merit, not on equity. And we want to make sure that within the compliance for SB 17, that medical school curriculum is part of your strategy and focus. So with that, Senator West, yes.
A couple of things, Chancellor. When can I expect response to my letter? When can I expect a response to my letter?
As soon as possible.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I'll have to go back and.
Well, I like to have a response, because I asked, I've got it from A&M, I've got it from all of the systems.
Okay.
I got a draft from you with not signed. And we asked about this over 2 weeks ago now? Over 2 weeks ago. And so I'd like to get it by the end of the week.
Sure.
All right. And then.
Give me more time. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the response. And then secondly, as it relates to the health-related institutions, are the programs that health-related institutions have that are geared towards different subpopulations, is that covered by DEI? So as an example, if we have a health-related institution that's dealing with issues concerning hypertension in African-American communities, would that be prohibited by the DEI programs?
That would be for the universities, but as the author of the
As
bill,
author of the bill.
we accepted research, strategies and related efforts, so that would be outside of the scope of the bill. But the Office of Health Equity that I mentioned just now to both respective systems that have such an office, it's tied to goals of removing obstacles to health, tied to poverty, discrimination, and their consequences, including powerlessness and lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, safe environments, and health care. And so, yes, there are some DEI-tied origins within both of those offices of health equity that are tied to Del Seaton and also tied to the Texas A&M Medical School. So, but research, as you mentioned, is excluded from the bill.
But I think this warrants a conversation, because I know that you've asked them to do something.
Sure.
Health equity means that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be healthy as possible. This requires removing obstacles to health such as poverty, discrimination and consequences, including the powerlessness and lack of access to good jobs. What part of that particular mission do you, as the author of Senate Bill 17, feel as though violates Senate Bill 17?
Well, it for instance, as it's been consistent with our conversations all through this journey, that if a potential medical school student that has incredible merit is not necessarily committed to signing off on a tie to powerlessness in society as a mindset that would qualify he or she to be accepted into Texas A&M's medical school, that would be a DEI-related, and faculty as well, right? A loyalty oath or a certain ideology related to politics, instead of hiring that individual physician that's going to teach at an HRI based on their competence, right? So I just wanted to make sure that the systems were including the HRIs and their respective entities like these offices in their audit process, and to advise the committee, are those part of compliance in their efforts, or is it not?
So what I just heard is this: if the systems are requiring that potential students or employees sign a loyalty oath, then they would be violating, obviously, Senate Bill 17.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
As we wrap up, I think we'd be remiss knowing our first panel in our first charge tied to campus unrest, and anti-Semitism on campus, if we did not mention that with you as leaders of the respective systems, being here before the committee. So I just I wanted to ask both of you, do you both recognize, especially with what happened on the UT campus, Chancellor, and across the country, that these were anti-Jewish protests in their very nature, or do you feel different?
I think I would reflect the testimony earlier of the student that there were certainly elements of it that was clearly anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic. And so, yes, the answer would be yes.
And Chancellor Sharp? Yeah.
We had 2 or 3 very civilized demonstrations. The main speaker gets up and starts the protest by howdy, and everybody howdies back.
Right.
And it's very respectable. Got a different breed of cat.
And I'm not speaking about necessarily activities on the campus of Texas A&M, but just as we saw this unrest across the nation, we heard testimony from, obviously from a student that reflected the views of many others, that they felt that they were targeted during a lot of this rhetoric and the chants and everything tied to the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, sometimes pro-Hamas. I just wanted, as chancellors, to let the committee know your feelings on that and that where you stood.
I don't like it at all. I mean, I admit to being biased. I mean, my late wife and I, spent a lot of time getting kids from Kiev in the Ukraine back into Israel. I fell in love with the place, and so I don't have much tolerance, I guess, personally for it.
But, Chancellor.
I would simply say, to follow up on the earlier point, and again, as Levi said, not everybody involved is an anti-Semite. And as you heard from the law professor, we value free speech, political speech, all of that. It's when it crosses the line in threats, intimidation, creating an environment where students cannot pursue their education in a potential Title VI violation. I have been involved in these issues for some time at 3 public university systems. I have been aggressively opposing BDS. I have public statements on that at 3 different places. While I've been at the University of Texas system, I led a group of 10 university presidents to Israel. I visited Nahal Oz. I know the spokesperson there. You may know that Nahal Oz is the kibbutz that's next door to Gaza that was attacked on.
Where the initial
October
attacks
7th.
took place, that's right, along with the music festival. Yes.
Correct. Unfortunately, this is a scourge that has been with our world for a long time. I was deeply troubled to read before, but then to hear the testimony from the ADL about the increase in anti-Semitic activity, and particularly in the last year. It's an enormous increase, and at college campuses across the country. We will protect the ability of our students to speak, political speech, et cetera, along the lines that Professor Collis outlined, but we won't allow people to be unsafe, and we won't allow people to be threatened and intimidated and harmed.
I think, Mr. Chairman, you have a letter submitted by the rabbi on our campus talking about how safe Jewish students feel on the A&M campus. As a matter of fact, it's a little-known fact that the word Hillel, the first college Hillel was established on the A&M campus, according to Rabbi Tarlow, and the word Hillel actually was invented there by somebody. And so we're very proud of that. I mean, the Jewish students on our campus, and we want more of them, I guarantee you they felt safe.
Well, I appreciate your testimony related to that subject. It was a very important charge that we have this interim, is why we led off with that subject matter. And having you and other chancellors coming before the committee, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that and ask your your opinions and for your comments related to the same. So with that, members, if there are no other questions, we appreciate your time for this first panel of the second charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Back to that.
This time, the chair calls Renew Couture, Donna Cornell, Eric Bentley, Ted Mitchell.